Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's joint IAB and ViralGains webinar. This is Nina Munoz, and I am a director with the IAB's Digital Video Center of Excellence. The topic for today is Don't Chase Eyeballs, Capture Hearts, the Journey to Better Video Advertising. So just to go through a few housekeeping items before we get started, everyone who has joined the webinar has joined the meeting on mute by default. However, we definitely do welcome questions. And we will have time at the end where we'll be going through those questions. So as we go through today's content, feel free to submit any questions that you have in one of two ways. By clicking on the text box, you can pose your question to the entire group, or by clicking on that little person icon, you can pose your question directly to the moderator, which is the IAB. We will also be making a recording of this webinar available afterwards. So before we jump into the main subject of the day, I do want to provide just a minute of context about who the IAB is for anybody who may not be familiar with it today. The IAB is a trade association that works across the media and marketing industries to help them thrive in a digital economy that, as we know, changes very quickly. The Video Center of Excellence is one unit within the IAB that focuses, not surprisingly, on video. And so our main mission is to simplify a video supply chain and promote best practices to help drive the continued growth of the video advertising ecosystem. And you'll see here that the Video Center is comprised of top publishers, ad tech vendors, marketers, and agencies. The Video Center's priorities fall into these four main buckets. So we're really working to facilitate the advancement of video everywhere through guidelines and standards. We work to educate the marketplace on the latest digital video trends through research and white papers. We really work to promote best practices to ensure the optimal user experience. So for example, this past year, we released a buyer's guide for vertical video advertising. And lastly, we couldn't do anything that we do without the support and collaboration of our member companies. And so we're really excited to be here today with ViralGains to discuss how to make a truly great video advertising experience. So to talk a little bit more about today's topic, we see that digital video is on the rise, and it's a powerful tool for marketers to use to reach their consumers. However, there certainly still are challenges in the space. For example, marketers are facing increased pressure to reach these audiences in an increasingly fragmented ecosystem. They're also expected to demonstrate marketing impact on sales and other business outcomes. So today, we're going to be talking about video advertising strategies that will help marketers cut through the noise, get in front of the right audiences, and drive high impact results throughout the consumer journey. Throughout the course of today's webinar, we will be hearing from a few speakers. I have already introduced myself with the IAB, but I'm really excited to be joined by Todd Loofbourrow, the CEO of ViralGains, and Georgina Goode, Director of Digital at Boeing. And so I'll now give them a second to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their background. So maybe we can start with Todd first.
Hi, this is Todd Loofbourrow. So I've been in the digital economy pretty much my whole career. I was entrepreneur in residence at the Initiative on the Digital Economy at MIT. And I've really been both an entrepreneur and an observer of what causes digital adoption. So I'm CEO of ViralGains. We're a platform for video that enables marketers to connect great brand stories with people who are likely to love those stories. To essentially give voice to both brands and people, and to help create authentic connections and conversation between brands and individuals. The goal is to understand where someone is with your brand and move them down the funnel toward brand love and purchase. To give you a sense of scale, we serve 26 of the Fortune 100 companies and almost 90 of the Fortune 500.
Great, thank you. Georgina?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Georgina Goode and I am Director of Digital at Boeing. Previously Group Strategy Director at Havas, and before my move to the US, led digital engagement strategy for HM Government and Number 10, who are really going through a widespread digital transformation program, so really making government services simpler, faster, and clearer for citizens. So a lot of work that we were doing there was very much about how we could better engage the general population around the work that we were doing within central government. My remit here at Boeing is pretty much is far reaching across digital. So we're not just looking at the platform piece around web, but also digital advertising, how we can be much more effective in terms of how we're spending our budget, and very much on the community engagement side and content strategy side sits within my remit. So delighted to be with you all today.
Great, thank you. And we're excited to hear more about this topic from both of you momentarily. So the agenda for today, I will continue to discuss some of the high-level digital video trends that the IAB is seeing today. And then I'm going to pass it over to Todd and Georgina to discuss the measurement disconnect that we see prevalent in the marketplace today, the importance of emphasizing the individual throughout a campaign, and how to leverage video throughout the entire customer journey. And lastly, we'll close up by highlighting a case study that will really bring to life everything that we're talking about today. So to get started, for anybody who has been to an IAB event this year, you've likely noticed a running theme, which is the rise of the 21st century direct-to-consumer brand economy. And so we're seeing these new direct-to-consumer brands like Glossier, Away, Harry's. They're really disrupting the business model of incumbent brands and leading to new ways of doing business. And these brands are characterized by being digitally native, having first-party relationships with their consumers, and are hyper-focused on that consumer experience. However, direct-to-consumer isn't just a new type of commerce that only these companies are utilizing. We really see it as next generation marketing, and we believe that digital video will be a core platform for both DTC brands and incumbent brands that will enable them to create this two-way connection with consumers. And throughout the course of today's content, we'll be talking about more strategies to create that two-way connection with video. But to take a step back, I'm sure it's not a surprise for anybody on the call that the internet is transforming into a video-first destination. According to Cisco, 80% of all internet traffic next year will be video. And according to a recent IAB study, we see that 70% of consumers globally are watching digital video content at least once a day. And as digital video has become a larger portion of overall media consumption, we are seeing that advertisers are following that trend. So digital video ad spend reached almost $12 billion in 2017 and is now outpacing the growth of digital advertising as a whole. And this is not an isolated trend. It is permeating every brand category. We are seeing brands in retail, auto, CPG, and many other brand categories really harnessing the power of sight, sound, and motion through digital video advertising. And as digital video is growing, the marketplace is pursuing creative innovation in order to create that deeper consumer connection that we were talking about earlier. So looking ahead to the next 12 months, we see that the marketplace, both publishers and brands and agencies, are feeling especially bullish on these new innovative formats like 6-second video, vertical video, and interactive video. Now, interactive video is a really interesting format to think about when we're thinking about creating that two-way connections with consumers. Through interactive video, both publishers and marketers have the opportunity to enhance what's typically a lean-back video experience by adding in an interaction element such as having the consumer take a poll or a quiz, or having that consumer engage with the ad further to learn more about the product, for example. And so we will be hearing from ViralGains how they're approaching interactive video in order to drive business outcomes for their clients. However, while there are certainly bright spots of opportunity within the digital video landscape, there are still challenges to overcome, and we talked about that a little bit earlier as well. So one, the consumer ad experience still maintains challenges as consumers continue to see interruptive or irrelevant ads. And as a result of that kind of negative consumer experience, we still see that consumers are utilizing ad blockers across a variety of their devices. Marketers still also need to think about brand safety and determining whether their ads are appearing in the right content to the right people at the right time. And lastly, measurement also remains one of those challenges. So we're seeing that there still remains this focus on legacy ad metrics like impressions. And we as a marketplace really want to think about how we can move past that focus to really measure the things that matter to marketers. So with all that as context, I will now pass it over to Todd from ViralGains so he can share how they're thinking about these trends and how they work with their marketer clients to overcome some of these challenges.
Thank you very much, Nina. Appreciate it a lot. So I'm really excited about this because we get to talk about some terrific topics. I'm going to do two things, really. I'm going to review some research that we partnered with the CMO Council on, and I'm going to do a bit of a fireside chat with Georgina, and I've had the privilege to work with Georgina throughout her career and most recently when she was at Havas and Socialize. And so I think that'll be a real treat for everybody. So as I mentioned, my background is in digital marketing and e-commerce, taught at Harvard and MIT in these topics. And so I approach these things with kind of a research point of view. So we partnered with the CMO Council, which is a leading organization for chief marketing officers. And we surveyed 233 senior marketing leaders from a whole variety of industries to really understand how they're navigating the digital landscape, what are their struggles and challenges, and what are the industry opportunities. And Nina mentioned how large video advertising is, $12 billion in the US alone, and how it's digital video and mobile are the most rapidly growing parts of the digital ecosystem now. And people are really still in their infancy on how to use these technologies. Many people come at it thinking that it's TV and it's going to be impression-based. And as Nina showed in some of her discussion, there really is much broader opportunity than that in digital video. So the findings from the CMO Council study highlight how broken it still is in how people use digital video advertising, the disconnect between what people want to do and what they're actually doing. But it also shows the potential for digital video to be a really high impact tool that the industry needs to move toward more accountable and more effective marketing. So as we move to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what we found in the CMO Council. The first thing we found is there was a big disconnect between what people wanted to drive and what they were actually using as their metrics. In fact, when digital video first came out, a lot of people thought of it as simply repurposed TV. And they used some of the same models they use for TV, gross rating points or impressions, as a way of thinking about video. In fact, video is fundamentally different than television. It's two-way. You know who watched, you know how long they watched, you can interact with them. And what we found is there's a big measurement disconnect between what people want to do and the kind of legacy thinking they brought to it. So 78% of marketers are held accountable for the impact that their work has on sales. That's a pretty high bar when 4 out of 5 marketers are asked, well, how did you actually move the needle on sales and can you prove it? 31% of marketers look to the number of viewable impressions to serve as a success metric. And viewable impressions are very disconnected from things that actually have a sales impact. Again, unlike television, with digital video, you can measure who's watching, how long they're watching, and what they do afterwards. And only 27% of marketers right now use direct sales as some kind of success metric for video advertising. So the key finding is that even though marketers are increasingly held accountable for sales impact, very few of them are using sales metrics or metrics related to sales to measure the success of their video campaigns. And this is really a massive disconnect that must be addressed. We can't measure based on impressions and look to drive results that we're not measuring. So if we look at the next slide, what we're really finding, what CMOs are talking about, is that they want to look beyond these top-line TV-like metrics like impressions. And instead of focusing on viewable impressions or top-line metrics like click-through rates or video completion rates, marketers should really look at business key performance indicators that really show the impact of their marketing on their business objectives and how to optimize toward those business objectives. When you look at these types of performance indicators, you can actually walk away with not just an impression count, but with quantifiable data that speaks to how engaged your consumers were, what the business impact was of that engagement, how you're moving people down the funnel and the like. And I've put a couple of examples here on the screen to look at optimizing campaigns toward things like landing page visits or email signups or even tracking in-store visits. We have a number of customers who have measured direct foot traffic in stores and indeed sales in stores or sales of specific products based on video campaigns they run in various regions. So you can really drive to a much more accountable set of metrics than people did at the beginning of using video. So if we go to the next slide, I'd like to talk to Georgina a little bit about some of the things that have come out in this study. And let me talk to a couple of these questions. So Georgina and Nina, please feel free to jump in as well. Why do you believe that the industry has been slow to adopt success metrics like business KPIs?
I think from my perspective, genuinely, I don't necessarily think there's a lack of understanding about the metrics. I think there is an issue around really identifying and honing in on those metrics that actually really matter to the business. And I think that's where the misunderstanding comes in. And I think we are in an age where we have so much data now that we almost over-report on our campaigns without really actually saying, okay, what are the objectives of this campaign? What are my key performance indicators? And what are the one or two metrics that align with those KPIs to show that I have delivered? And I think that's where we need to strip back the volumes of data that we have at our fingertips and have a much more simplistic look at how we measure campaigns in terms of what really matters to me as a marketer, what really matters to me as a business. And not all of that is necessarily lead gen, but I think it is very much having that honest conversation around, okay, this is the objective of my campaign and this is how I'm going to show success. But I think the challenge has been is that we have so much data, we almost over-report and get almost confused with what we're actually reporting on in the first place. I think it's about keeping it simple and, like I said, being really honest about what matters.
No, that's great. In fact, in the IT world, we talk about data, information, and knowledge. And oftentimes at the beginning, people are just overwhelmed with data. Now, it's good to have data, but if you can't figure out what's important and turn it into information, it's just a sea of numbers. And if that information doesn't inform something that impacts the business, it's not knowledge. So I see in this industry a similar evolution to what's gone on in other areas of software over the last 10, 15 years. We're now at a place where, holy cow, we've got digital, we can measure, we can get all this data. And that's very different than other kinds of advertising. Now, how do we turn that data into useful information? And indeed, what knowledge do we want out of it? And I think that comes from what you said. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to achieve in any given?
Yeah, it's so true. It's really about what are those actionable insights? How am I going to prove success? How and not always that is about generating revenue, but it's about what are the learnings here as well? How are we going to get better and iterate on future campaigns? So I think it's absolutely that. I mean, I've been in numerous roles where people have served up reports to me, and I'm like, well, what does this actually mean? You've given me lots of numbers. I have lots of PowerPoint slides, but what does this mean in terms of what does success look like? What are the benchmarks, the context that we're putting these metrics in to actually show me that we've delivered on this? And I think, as you say, it's very much just honing in on what is the key insight here. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and it feels like one of those situations where the better you define your objectives, the easier it is to determine whether you achieve them. And that sounds so basic, But it's very often the case that we'll go into campaigns without clear objectives, and then we're just overwhelmed with the data. And I've seen clients who just do a wonderful job saying, look, this is a top of funnel campaign. We're looking for not simply impressions, we're looking for engaged reach. So we do we know how many people have viewed this all the way through to completion? And do we know what they think of our brand? Or others who say, what do people feel about our brand relative to competitors? Or how interested are they in this product? Or, are we on their short list of things they buy? Or are they likely to buy us? And all those feel like the kinds of things you're talking about.
Yeah.
Any other metrics that people should think about as they look to move away from impression or TV metrics to things that are more actionable?
I think it's an interesting one because I think that there isn't necessarily, the one key performance indicator that basically is better than others. It depends on the objective of that campaign. I mean, we run tons of video here from Boeing, and some of that very much is around awareness and brand building. It very much is. We have, a longer term strategy based on reputation management and reputational tracking, and a lot of the brand messages that we put out there through video is very much around that reach piece and that sentiment analysis off the back of it. But then we also have other facets of the business when we look at products and services, and also things like talent acquisition and signups to our, foundational database, which very much are action orientated. And so we look at a different set of KPIs and metrics to measure those. So there's no kind of one size fits all, and I think that this is the focus of this webinar. For us, it very much is a mix. We have multiple business units and business objectives we need to achieve, and so those we have to align the best metrics to be able to report back on those. But I think it's just having the right mix. Like I said earlier, is like really streamlining how you report on this stuff. And making sure I do think, about the action of the consumer. So what are you trying to achieve? Sometimes it is just about getting content out there. But for us, when it comes to things like Boeing stores, when it comes to signing up to our advocacy database, we need to see results there in terms of how we're generating those leads. That's really important. But I wouldn't be able to define one KPI over others as being more important. It depends on those. It depends on those business needs.
Makes a lot of sense. I served for a time as a president at iRobot, the company that makes the room and vacuum cleaners, and we had run some TV ad campaigns to try to build brand love and awareness. What we found is more people knew us from YouTube videos of cats riding around on Roombas than anything we'd done on TV. So, consumers very much want to be a part of the conversation, and you got to make sure you're at every level of the funnel being clear about what objective you're looking to measure. So let's go into the next conclusions from the CMO Council study on the next slide. There's a focus really on macro level things, and marketers are not really fully leveraging consumer insights. 86% of the marketers surveyed are using data to target. So data is very common, and again, that's a mentality that comes from other kinds of advertising. What gender do we want to reach? What age group? But only 30% have access to comprehensive data on viewers and their behaviors. So one of the key insights that came out of the study is that marketers want to get information through two-way conversation and interaction, but they don't have access to good data, and they're not quite sure how to get it. Most of them don't have first-party insights that they need to optimize their campaigns in real time. Most of them don't have the learnings throughout a campaign that can let them use the feedback they're getting on that campaign to optimize as the campaign goes, to tell more impactful stories. So the opportunity here is to not just get more data, but to get data that allows you to take insight on your creative, data that allows you to take insight on who you should target, data that allows you to gain insight on your consumers and what their behaviors are likely to be. Next slide, let's talk a little bit about another large difference between video and other forms of advertising like television. is that you can actually emphasize down to the individual level. So marketers are starting to measure a lot more than campaign performance. Of the marketers we surveyed, 34% are measuring behavior on the part of individual consumers, or the experience that the consumer has in interacting with the ad, or with an engagement experience after the ad, or with a website that they might move to after clicking on the ad. 26% are measuring intent to purchase. 25% are measuring sentiment and attitude, and that's a real move. It wasn't more than a few years ago that brands started measuring sentiment and attitude within video units by asking questions and understanding where someone is, and then by measuring the lift generated in sentiment and attitude through an advertising campaign. So Nina talked about the direct-to-consumer market and the brand direct economy. People are getting used to being asked how they feel, what they think. To have brands speak directly with them and not simply at them in the old television model. The model reminds me of the old British Empire phrase where they used to say, if the natives don't speak English, just speak louder. That's kind of the television and the impression mentality. Just hit them over the head with an impression enough times and maybe they'll like our brand. In fact, what marketers are telling us is that they're starting to use video in ways that tell us how someone feels about the brand, about the campaign, about the product, and that they're beginning to leverage those consumer insights that they're getting as a campaign runs in developing key messaging, changing their calls to action and other things in the creative to see what's most effective. Put simply, deep and declared consumer intelligence is really one of the keys to fueling business impact. And if you can really start to get insight during campaigns on what your consumers think, you are beginning to move down the funnel toward real business impact. So let's move to the next slide, and let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean when I talk about engagement experiences and real-time consumer impact. On the left, you see an example of an engagement experience that's asking someone about a particular product, in this case, the Jeep Wrangler Sport, and asking them a very simple question: how likely are you to test drive a Jeep Wrangler Sport? For someone who says very likely, you suddenly now have an audience of people who are interested, or at least considering a test drive. You can look at that audience and see what are the shared characteristics of that audience to try to find more people like those. You can take those individuals and build a segment about those individuals. So the next time you see them online, you show them a display ad or a video or a piece of content that maybe gives them an incentive to come in, or lets them know that there's a sale going on, or emphasizes a feature of the product. So attitude is one area where you can gather real-time consumer insight about how a person feels. The second one on the right of your screen is behavior, which is how a person acts. And if you think of these two categories of attitude and behavior, you've got the big categories of measurement that can start to turn data into information and indeed knowledge. So how a person acts. So this is an example from a company that makes protein products of various sorts. So after watching one video ad, they have a chance to look at some other products that the company makes. And all those additional clicks are earned media. You get a sense of what products they're interested in. You can start to branch those consumers down and better understand them. So behavior is how a person acts. What did they do with the ad? What did they do after the ad? Did they go to a web page? Did they have high dwell time on the web page? Did they register? Did they sign up for a course? Did they download a brochure? So today, video solutions like ViralGains engagement experiences give brands innovative ways to connect with consumers. You can do it in real time. You don't just set and forget a campaign. You can leverage the real-time insights that you're getting as a campaign is running, using machine learning models and using the data you're getting in real time to understand the individuals that comprise your audiences, to give them an opportunity to optimize the campaign to the best performing audiences and the best performing inventory, to find the most engaged audiences, to find the highest performing messaging and creative, and to drive conversations that provide a more customer-centric experience. So put simply, if you think of an ad on video, not as a static piece like it would be on television, but almost as an app like you'd have on your phone, that it can be very interactive, very dynamic, that you can have real-time and two-way conversation with your audience. And if you take the learnings you get from that app-like experience and apply them to how you run the campaign and what you show that person next, you're suddenly using video in a very different way. then you're using television. And you're starting to drive from talking at people to talking with people. So let's talk a little bit with you, Georgina, about some of these issues. I'm going to throw a couple of questions up here. So how should brands and agencies keep individual consumers in mind in order to drive a successful campaign?
I think, firstly, I just want to say those examples about the real-time insights are really compelling, and I absolutely think it's one of those aspects of capturing data that is so vital to really understand those individuals that you want to target and in which way. So from my perspective, that's truly exciting. I think but for me, it's really getting under the skin of the consumer at the beginning in the planning stage. So really having that really robust research in place. And we do that a lot in Boeing. We have a very clear idea on who our target audiences are. We have numerous. But I think it's also being mindful about how different audiences interact with creative in different ways, which is exactly what you talked about. So it's very much about having those multiple creatives to be able to test and learn and understand what resonates better. It's about having and implementing things like brand lift studies or just those types of questionnaires that you really start to get that feedback to understand how consumers, not just in a big bulk of that audience that you're targeting, but are actually reacting to the narrative that you're putting out in that particular piece of content. So I think it's very much thinking about tracking. It's very much thinking about how consumers are not some big homogenous group. They are going to react to creative in different ways, and then optimizing that strategy off the back of it. So having different types of creative to be able to do that.
Makes a lot of sense. Nina, what are you seeing at the IAB on these issues?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually attended an industry dinner last night that was talking exactly about this topic and how we're using data to not only target audiences, but also to help with the creative planning process and the creative testing process. And I think we've heard a lot of what Georgina echoed in terms of really getting ahead of this planning and utilizing data from the very start of the campaign, from the planning process to help inform the creative and for the targeting process to identify the right audiences to target, and then to the post-campaign process to measure success. We hear that there are, of course, some challenges in doing that, both organizationally. How do we get the creative organizations and the data organizations and the marketer organizations lined up to create those synergies? But we at the IAB are really enthusiastic about continuing to explore this subject to figure out how to make that process as smooth as possible for everyone in the industry.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this issue of TV versus digital. So if we go to the next slide, let's talk a little bit more about what we're seeing from the CMO Council. So let's take this stat. 78% of marketers surveyed indicates that the placements were largely used to promote high-level brand awareness. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using video for brand awareness. It's one of the largest categories of using video. But it's capable of so much more than awareness, and it's capable, as we've described, of doing so much more even at the awareness stage to measure. So that's really just the tip of the iceberg. So if we move beyond awareness, in the next slide, we're looking at leveraging consumer insights at every stage of the consumer journey. And I love the picture on this one because it reminds me of some of my old iRobot robots. But, it's just there's an opportunity at every stage of the funnel to use video as a two-way medium. And if you let that bit flip for a moment in your head, that digital video is two-way, you can start to think creatively at every stage of the funnel about how to drive intimate connections with consumers and drive business outcomes that you can establish for a campaign, as Georgina and Nina talked about, and measure at each stage. So let's use a couple of examples of two-way engagement. You can understand how consumers feel about your brand. You can understand how they feel before they've been exposed to a video ad and work to improve the perception of those who may not feel positive. Every brand goes through challenges, and understanding how people perceive your brand, and how various messages move the needle on that perception is incredibly important. You can understand who your most likely buyers are to understand purchase intent. The example I used earlier of the Jeep Wrangler Sport, we're used to in advertising kind of separating research and market research, which is the listening part of our operations, from advertising, which is the talking part of our operations. In fact, with digital video, because as Nina said, it's got sight, sound, motion, storytelling, all this tremendous engagement power, but it also is two-way. With digital video, you can do both talk and listen at the same time. And you can do it at such a quick pace. Every time someone watches a video through to completion or takes an action after watching the video through to completion, you're getting information. Rather than throw that into a PowerPoint and report on it at the end of the campaign, if you're using that in real time, both with your experts, your media planners, and with your machine learning to improve the campaign as it goes and to better understand your buyers, you're really getting the power of digital. And finally, depending on where you are in the funnel and what's the nature of your content, you can also use it to drive conversions. I noted in the slide that Nina showed us earlier that the biggest category of digital video spending was retail CPG. And so certainly driving people into stores, increasing basket size, driving online conversions, understanding why someone buys so you know what to target them with, those things that are likely to drive a buyers to purchase is certainly a big area and use of video. And so the next thing I want to talk about is data. We've referenced data a couple of times, and both Georgina and Nina talked about the importance of data, but the fact that we're overwhelmed with data. So don't forget that a journey is never over. So an organization really owns their own data. And in this digital ecosystem where brands are trying to navigate between working in open app, in the open web, in open interconnected environments with their own internal data, and then with some walled gardens where they can also advertise, we believe every organization needs to own their own data. That's really a very important part of marketing. And that once a campaign is finished, the insights you've gathered from a given campaign should be used to remarket across the open web, from social to mobile to display, that you can use technology to start to understand those audiences and build lookalikes that you can use to find people wherever they are, discover more people like them, build your following in a healthy, transparent, and very data-driven way. So a couple of areas that people use data that they're gathering in video most effectively: retargeting your most engaged audiences across your channel, social, mobile, open web. Find more people who behave like the ones who interacted positively with your products, bought your products, like your brand, and build your audience in that healthy, transparent way. And again, the CMO Council findings were really showing a very heavy emphasis on openness and owning your own data. So let's talk a little bit about that topic. So on the next slide, how should brands and agencies work together, Georgina and Nina, to make sure they're getting the most out of the buyer journey and the data they collect?
I think it's very much, I mean, from my perspective, being on the brand side, it's very much about having that true partnership with our agencies to make sure that we're working in total unison as we're tracking that campaign and working through those optimizations together. And for my team here and the agencies we work with, it very much is that partnership, which we're very fortunate to have. So I think that's really key. I think as we've talked about this idea of kind of real-time insight, that can only really be actionable if you are working together like that and not in silos. So for me, it's all about that relationship between the brand and the agency to make sure that you have that, first of all, that full funnel approach to that campaign that needs to be in place first, but also that you're working together in unison throughout that campaign, and people aren't working on acting on data in silo, which is really important.
And same from our end. You know, some of the quotes we've been hearing in the conversations we've been having across the industry is, you know, that the data and creative teams really need to be married, and that people really need to be employing a big team approach and getting everybody together at the beginning, even before that official RFP is put out.
Yeah, I mean, at Boeing, we very much have that kind of multidisciplinary disciplinary mindset in terms of the teams that we pull together. So we'll have our agency partners working alongside our in-house analytics team, with our in-house paid media specialists, our community managers, our content producers. So it very much is having all those stakeholders, as you will, very much involved, even in the creation of the brief early doors. So for me, it's making sure that you have all aspects of delivery represented when you're planning these types of campaigns.
So I can't let today go by without commenting on sort of news of the day, which is, after a lot of scandals at Facebook, the Cambridge Analytica, the data lock-in, privacy issues, weak data protection, fake news and brand content appearing alongside things that brands don't find savory. There was a big event in the last 24 hours in that Facebook's stock down at 1.23% in the last 24 hours, and it feels like the practice of walling off your data and not sharing it with brands, and some of the data practices of one of the walled gardens I feel like finally getting some scrutiny. Any comments on not specifically Facebook, but what do you think of as brands and as a leading trade association for the field on whether or not data should be a brand's asset or should it be locked away in a platform? Georgina, you want to talk to that one a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I thought that was for Nina. No, absolutely. I think from a Boeing perspective, we very much are very focused on having our own data strategy here, in so much as we want to have a much better understanding of our first party data here. And we are building out, the data strategy to be able to continue to build that first party data set and get much smarter with how we action that data. I think when it comes to third party, we want to have more control over our own data. That's where we kind of sit on this. But we are still very reliant on the likes of Facebook in terms of in terms of our marketing. So it's kind of it's a difficult one. It's part and parcel of how they operate, but it is something that we struggle with because we very much want to be in control of our own data. I think there's no kind of simple answer to that question, but being that we have a dedicated strategy, like I said, to be able to own our own data and be much smarter with how we use it. It's just, like I say, it's a tricky one.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that's certainly what I'm hearing from a lot of brands is their emphasis on having their own data, having control over the data, and being able to use their data is certainly a goal. And how to get there is sometimes fraught with challenges, but it's clearly seems to be a direction brands are moving in. Nina, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we talk about this often, and clearly there's a lot of benefits to having open data and having that sharing of data. But from an industry level, it seems like there's more work to be done in terms of building that trust and transparency across partners, and really making sure that every part of the ecosystem is understanding the use cases that this data sharing can enable. So, it's not just that partners are asking for data just to ask for data, but what can that enable? Can that enable smarter measurement or smarter targeting? And so really defining those use cases could be helpful to help the industry feel more comfortable with that data sharing aspect.
Yeah, I think that's a good insight because as the question here says, which I think we've covered, but using video for top and lower funnel, there are different use cases for data in those different stages of the funnel. So I think it makes a lot of sense to get a little bit more nuanced about how we do it. And, like any new set of technologies, it takes a while to figure out what the right way to do it is. But the principles of ownership by brands and transparency of how things are used and openness seem to be the ones that the industry is trying to move toward. All right, I want to move into a case study. talk a little bit about some of this consumer insight and action. So we've talked about the findings of the CMO Council research on what marketers are trying to do and what they're doing, the steps they're taking to making video a more two-way and interactive experience where they can gain consumer insight and use that insight in campaign. And we've used some examples of how you gather data like that. I'd like to run through a full case study to show you soup to nuts how one brand has used it. This is a large fast food chain. And I'm going to show you in this example how consumer preference drives not only what campaigns get launched in what areas, but moves all the way down to in-store operations. So this is an example from a brand that was launching a series of chicken Caesar items. As you see on the screen there, a fried chicken sandwich, a chicken Caesar wrap, and a chicken Caesar salad. And the question was, which one of these would be most popular in which regions? And therefore, what should the store signage be, and the subway ads, and the inventory, and how do you figure that out when you're rolling out and introducing the products? So let's look at the next slide to look at how they did it. They ran an ad like that. They asked the question, which of the new chicken Caesar items do you love the most? And if you look closely at this screen, you'll see not only the answers, they got about 10,000 responses on this particular question, but if you look at the top of the screen, you'll see that this is just in Baltimore. So you can actually look city by city and see what the preferences are for these various items at launch. And therefore, you can say, well, in this case, the fried chicken sandwich feels like one that we maybe ought to emphasize in our store signage, or instruct the store managers to put up that poster or make those the subway ads. So if you think about that, what we just looked at, we went from a video advertisement to earned media by someone clicking in on another product, maybe they learn more about, insight as to what individual consumers and groups of consumers and consumers in a regional area prefer, to what campaign to show next, store signage, store operations, inventory. Suddenly marketing is touching not simply awareness, but operations and profitability. So I think this is a really interesting example at the consumer level of the kind of phenomenon that Nina was talking about, direct to consumer, and the fact that digital video is a way to get directly to the consumer, have a two-way conversation, and use that conversation to change what messaging you show to individual consumers and how you actually run the operation for profitability. So let's take a look at the next screen. This is another question. So back one. I think we skipped one ahead. There we go, breakfast sandwich. So now you're looking at which breakfast sandwich is your go-to sandwich with your morning coffee. And in this particular case, it is the bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. So I happen to be a fan of the bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich. It's what I'll usually get on my way in the morning. So maybe they caught me here. But what you're looking at is in this particular geography, that's the sandwich that's preferred. Again, the same sorts of implications. What are you going to have with your morning coffee? It's both market research and advertising at the same time. All right, so the next screen shows one other example of the kind of data you can gather in unit with video. This is in New York. So this is the data for one particular DMA, but you could run this across all the DMAs you ran in, or do control and expose in different cities. How likely are you to try one of these 2 for $2.50 menu options? In this case, in New York, almost 60% of the people are very likely to try it. That tells the advertiser pretty early insight as to how successful their promotion is, and perhaps then they roll it out to more cities. If it was less successful, maybe they would tweak it a little bit before they rolled it out, or rolled it out in test. So I think these are good examples of using deep insights and a brand's ability to take those deep insights and determine which products to promote in a region, consumer response to various offers and promotions, to get data in real time that let you drive more sales and make their advertising spending far more efficient. Because instead of a model where we're talking at people and then getting a ream of data back in PowerPoint and trying to figure out what it all means, we're moving to a model where we're talking with people and we're reacting in real time to the insights, the analytics, the attitudes, and the behaviors that we gather. So with that, I'm going to summarize just a few key takeaways, and then we have a little bit of time if there are questions from the audience that people have interest in particular areas. So the key takeaways from the CMO Council research and our collaboration with CMO Council and IAB is 4 things. look beyond top-line metrics. Look for things that get closer to business insight, whether you're looking at engaged reach at the top of the funnel or likelihood to act or shop at the bottom of the funnel, or brand sentiment or product sentiment in the middle. Emphasize the individual, because digital video gives you the ability to do TV class storytelling at the individual level and to do customizations that are simple, like calls to action and follow-on videos and what they see next, that can be done at very high scale for very reasonable cost. Third, leverage real-time consumer insights that you gather in campaign to make sure you're understanding why people are buying, what they think of the brand, what they think of the product. And finally, don't just think of video at the awareness stage. Video is, in fact, a tool. It's a new platform for engaging throughout the buyer journey. And if we start to think in terms of consumer journeys and how individual consumers get from lack of awareness about our brand all the way through to brand love, purchase, and engagement, we're starting to use the full power of digital video. So that's the end of remarks. Other than Q&A, I definitely want to thank Georgina and Nina and the IAB. And Nina, do you have any questions you want to close us with, or questions from the audience?
Yeah, there were a couple questions that we can address in the last 5 minutes here. One, going back to the previous slide of one of the case studies, someone was curious about what you could share in terms of where these ads were being served. Was it social? Were there other placements?
Yeah, typically we serve across the open web, in-app, and in mobile. So it really is almost anywhere except the walled gardens. So you'll see it on, CNN. You'll see it on social environments. You'll see it inside apps. So we really run anywhere except the two closed walled gardens.
Okay, great. Another question that came through was, we've been talking a lot about those DTC brands, and many of them inherently have a lot of data about their audiences. But how do you advise your customers or marketers who may not already have a lot of that data on their audience? Where can they get those data sources?
It's a great question. I mean, there's a couple of places. Certainly, targeting kinds of data you'll get through your partners and your data management providers. We work by default with Nielsen Marketing Cloud on that kind of data. But I think the heart of your question is really something else, which is how can they create a way to easily gather information over time that scales? And so as soon as they start to think of digital video advertising as a two-way tool for gathering data as much as a tool for advertising, they can start to gather data by running ads. And so there's a bunch of examples. I'll give a couple. Control and expose, asking someone what they think of a product or their likelihood to purchase is, and then asking similar audience who's been exposed to your ad what their likelihood to purchase is. You start to get insight into why people are buying. I'll give you another example. Let's imagine someone's watched a video of a line of cars and trucks that a manufacturer makes. And at the end of the video, they're asked, are you a car person or a truck person? Well, somebody says truck person. The next time we see them, they're going to see the truck ads. And maybe we'll ask them, do you love the Ford F-150 for safety or performance? And if they tell us performance, the next time we see them, they're going to see some digital ads that have to do with performance features. So if you think of these advertising tools as tools for gathering data, you can start to build data that you may not have yet. And you're building not just data on individual consumers, you're building insights on what consumers and groups care about. So it can help you both build your database, but also shape your understanding of how people perceive your brand.
Great. And one last question here. A lot of formal data sources are available to big brands and agencies, but do you have any advice or suggestions of what free or cheaper platforms are available to those agencies and brands that have smaller budgets?
It's going to depend a lot on what kind of data you're looking for. So I'm not sure I have any generic advice. I would think of it as sort of similar to what I said in the last question. There are two sources of data. There's data you can find and buy, and there's data you can gather. And so I think the heart of that question is, where can I find and buy data? But I would encourage whoever asked it to think about the second category, which is how can I create a process for gathering data that scales and develops understanding for me over time. targeting data is relatively easy to buy. It's not super expensive. The problem is you don't know how accurate it is. And there's issues on match rates and other things. We urge brands, while targeting is very important, and with some products and some campaigns, targeting is extremely important because they're specific to age or gender or something. But with video, oftentimes you get a phenomenon where something catches on and people forward it and talk about it. And in those circumstances, we urge people at the beginning of campaigns often to open up the targeting and see who engages, because then you're getting data in real time through that campaign itself about who's engaging in the campaign. A few years ago, we did a Mother's Day campaign with a greeting card company, and they were targeting millennials to buy greeting cards. We talked to the agency and we agreed we'd open up the targeting at the beginning. And in fact, it was the moms who engaged and forwarded the campaign. The campaign went wild and ended up winning Cannes Lion Awards and all these things, and 20 million plus views. And it was only because they weren't overly rigid about the targeting up front. They had an approach that said, let's see who gets excited about this. And let's let the combination of individual actions and behaviors and machine-based learning figure out who should see this.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Well, it looks like we are right up on time here. I want to give a big thank you to Todd and Georgina for joining us today. I know I learned a lot in today's conversation, and I hope everybody on the call did as well. And we will be making a recording of this webinar available for download afterwards. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you again for Todd and Georgina for some great conversation and insights.
No problem. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.